Hey guys, and welcome back to Mad About Skin. In today's video, we're doing something a little bit different. We're starting a new series here on the channel where we go undercover and look into the past of some of the biggest ingredients that find their way into our day-to-day skincare routines. Some of these pasts are controversial, others are humorous, some are just downright weird, and we're going to cover them all. But we're starting out with what I think is the most controversial of the ingredients that reach our skincare routines, and that's tretinoin. Often referred to as the gold standard in anti-aging, it's fantastic when it comes to minimizing fine lines and wrinkles, boosting collagen and elastin production. It's a favorite with skincare nerds, dermatologists and the wider community, but how over the past 50 years has it gone from being a treatment for acne to something that really has shaped the way that, particularly in the US, medicines are marketed, advertised and reach the consumer? It's had a way outsized impact on the way that we interact with cosmeceuticals, medicines and skincare, and I think it's worth unpacking. So sit back, relax, let's talk the controversial past of tretinoin. Now in today's video I'm sharing with you a timeline of how we went from its origins through to the present day. But when it comes to tretinoin, I don't think any of this should determine whether you use or avoid it as an ingredient. All our skin is unique, and we're looking at a history of something because usually if you're watching the channel, you're probably a little bit nerdy when it comes to skincare. I know I certainly am, and I kind of like to see how things have evolved and how they've shaped the modern day, even though they've been around for years. However, before everyone comes at me in the comments, if you absolutely adore tretinoin, continue to use it. If you don't currently use it, I don't think anything in this video is going to change that perception. This is more about the history rather than determining whether you should or shouldn't use an ingredient. So let's just put that out there front and center. But I do think it's a really interesting study in the way that one ingredient has so profoundly shaped medicine, prescriptions, and the wider healthcare industry, and it's worth delving into. So in that spirit, I would love to know what your hot take is on everything. So sound off down in the comment section below. If you're enjoying this new series, you want to see more installments in it, then make sure to let me know by reaching down and giving the video a big thumbs up and a like. A lot of research and looking into things went into this. A lot of time was committed to this particular video. So if you did happen to enjoy it or appreciate that, like I say, a like would be very, very much appreciated. Now, without further ado, let's cut that waffle and delve straight on in. So, tretinoin, also known by its brand name retin-a, has been around for the past 50 or so years. It was actually originally isolated and then used as a topical treatment for acne, and the FDA approved it as an acne treatment back in 1971. So retin-a found its way onto the market thanks to one doctor who is pretty controversial, as I know a lot of doctors, particularly back in that era, could be a little on the controversial side. I think Dr. Klingsman was one of the more controversial, but he isolated the vitamin A derivative, which became known as tretinoin, and then worked to prove its effectiveness when used against acne and minimizing acne, inflammation and breakouts, which it absolutely did. And like I say, 1971, they got a patent from the FDA for topical application in treatment of acne. Now, he put a lot of research into tretinoin. It almost became like his life's work. And whilst some of that research was controversial, back in the day in the 1960s and the leading to 70s, where he took a lot of his research, it was quite common to do research on inmates of prisons, particularly in the US. That was generally phased out in Europe and other countries, but in the US, that was something that actually happened right the way through until the mid-70s. So a lot of this research took place on inmates in a way that wasn't always agreed upon, and obviously today that wouldn't happen. Some of that was controversial because he was quite an avid proponent of this, even when it was being phased out. And he did a lot of studies and a lot of trials into the effectiveness of tretinoin topically applied to treatment of acne. He, however, worked for a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, and Big Pharma, as we know, likes the money. When the cash registers are ringing, everybody's happy. And the issue really with tretinoin back in the day was that not many people actually have acne, not severe enough to actually warrant something that's quite potent like tretinoin. So the market was relatively small. For those who needed it, it worked amazingly well. But the pool of people that could benefit was pretty niche and narrow, and it just wasn't bringing in the dollars. Reportedly, once it got its patent, tretinoin, then termed retin-a in terms of its brand name, was actually bringing in around $100,000 a day in sales, which, you know, shouldn't be sniffed at, but that's not the mega bucks that you see some of the blockbuster drugs today bring in for their pharmaceutical overlords. And so it just wasn't paying the bills. And this is where I think things started to get a little controversial and a little crafty. So the inmates that were being tested on by Dr. Klingman around promoting this as an acne treatment said it absolutely cured their acne, but often anecdotally reported that it had some beneficial impact on their overall skin in terms of the aging profile, minimizing the texture of the skin, and just helping to smooth everything out. Time and time again, patients, we'll call them patients, I think subjects would probably be a more accurate term, were reporting that they actually saw an improvement in terms of the elasticity of the skin, the overall look, appearance, and the texture. This wasn't a one-off, it seemed to be happening over and over, but Dr. Klingman wasn't somebody that really listened. He wasn't, by his own admission, somebody that actually listened to patients. He liked to follow the data, actually follow his own course of action. So he kind of put that to one side. That was until 1977 came around, where Johnson & Johnson, which owned the subsidiary that he worked for, said, yeah, this ain't paying the bills, and we actually need to see some more revenue coming from this, or we're going to halt some of the work and the studies that you're doing into vitamin A derivatives. He then thought time was to get a bit crafty. If acne treatment is too niche a pool, what could we do in order to actually get those cash registers ringing? And he thought, anti-aging. Now, anti-aging is an unlimited pool. Who doesn't want to take a few years off the look of the skin? Everybody was chasing that fountain of youth, and so it was a much broader demographic that were wanting to access anti-aging. And so he thought back and thought, you know, quite a few people said that topically applied tretinoin had some benefits in terms of the look, the appearance, and the aging profile of the skin. So there might actually be something in that. So he conducted one study. He actually conducted this study into rhino mice. He didn't actually apply it on to human skin and study it in that way at this point. He applied it onto rhino mouse and said, yeah, it does seem to be actually having an impact. And he was very bold in terms of some of the literature that he put out around these rhino mice, which I'll come on to in a minute. He said, yeah, this clearly works. So he applied to the FDA, which are the regulators in the US, to renew his patent on tretinoin to apply it to the use of anti-aging creams. However, the FDA primarily are focused down on treating illnesses. They're not really going to prioritize anti-aging, which is cosmetic and a nice to have. So there was a huge backlog and they weren't going to get round to this patent anytime soon. And Dr. Klingman, he didn't want to wait, and this is where things take a very, very controversial turn. So he decided that instead of waiting for the FDA to get round to approving everything, checking the safety, the efficacy, and doing the proper regulatory route, he would go straight to source, and he would actually market this product directly to consumers who will then apply pressure to their dermatologists and general practitioners to prescribe tretinoin off-label. So off-label is something which is quite common. It is primarily done in the US as a result of tretinoin, and we'll come on to that in a minute, but it is something that also happens globally, which is where certain medications have a label attached to them saying this is what it will do, this is what it's been tested and trialed out as being efficacious against. They'll often say suitable for this demographic, for the treatment of this. And it's actually quite specific. That's because in order to get those labels, these products, these ingredients have to go through robust testing to determine who they're safe to be used for and who they're actually going to benefit. However, GPs, general practitioners, dermatologists, any medical prescriber is able to prescribe an ingredient or a product off-label outside of what is recommended if they think it's beneficial for the consumer, for the patient. Now, at the end of the day, most doctors don't want to do that because the risk then transfers to them. If something goes wrong with an on-label prescription, then it goes back to the manufacturer who said it was safe to use. If you prescribe something off-label and something goes wrong, the risk is then coming back to the general practitioner, to the prescriber, who then allowed that to happen and made that judgment. So until tretinoin really hit the scene, most doctors were very, very reluctant to do off-label prescribing. Only in cases where it really was evident that it would benefit someone would they do it. Then tretinoin happened. And Johnson & Johnson, as the owner of the subsidiary, and Dr. Klingman paid millions and millions of dollars in promoting tretinoin as a hero in terms of anti-aging. They use terms like fountain of youth. They like to attach elixir to everything because that sounds mysterious. And they really, really went after the consumer, pressuring them to then go to their prescriber and saying, I need this as part of my anti-aging skincare routine. Until this point, that hadn't actually been done. And according to data at the time, over 80% of the prescriptions for retin-a, for tretinoin, were off-label. So for anti-aging, rather than its original source of acne and sales, exploded. Now, this is the first thing that really, when we talk about how things that happened so long ago in terms of one ingredient impact what we see today, this is the first direct to consumer marketing of medical grade ingredients or products. So if you live in the US, you're probably quite used to seeing adverts between programs promoting certain drugs, saying speak to your doctor about this, this and this, and then reeling off a whole lot of side effects super quick, hoping that you kind of won't notice. But it then leads the consumer to then go to their doctor, to their prescriber, and ask for something rather than taking the lead from the prescriber. This is something that is very, very unique to the US. A lot of this advertising of prescription strength products is banned in the European Union, in the UK, in Australasia, or it's heavily restricted in other countries. It's only really in the US where this happens wholesale. And I know from someone who has been to the US many times, when I go over there and I watch TV, I'm genuinely shocked to see this. It's not something that we see. And this all started with tretinoin. That cream that you apply at the end of your skincare routine on an evening is actually responsible for the absolute myriad of pharmaceutical advertising that we see today. They kickstarted that, and because there was no pushback, the regulators did literally nothing about it. It opened the floodgates for everyone to then jump on board, and marketing prescription strength products direct to consumer became the norm because of tretinoins. That is one huge. Next time you see an ad for any pharmaceutical grade product, know that that's happening as a result of tretinoin, Dr. Klingsman, and everything that was going on around the time. So they went hard, and they actually used some of the images of the testing they did onto rhino mice to really promote this. It's said to be the most effective anti-aging treatment on the market, and this was all hype because at the time it only actually had 2 studies with around 45 people in total having actually taken part in that. That's not enough to conclude that something is the most robust, the best at something, but he used these images of rhino mice, which I'm showing here, to say, look, if this can happen on a mouse, think of what it can do to your skin. And that is very striking. It's very visual, and sales went through the roof. Tretinoin sales went from around $100,000 a day to $2 million a day, practically overnight. Everybody wanted to get their hands on this, and this was a phenomenon that was unique to the US. If you think about today, and I've got a little ask for everyone that's watching this video at this point. If you use tretinoin, so if you're a tretinoin user, drop your country flag down in the comments now, because I want to kind of test this out. Most prescriptions for tretinoin, be it brand name retin-a or the generic tretinoin, are in the US. It's such a popular ingredient and product in the US, and that popularity doesn't flow through to the rest of the world. Sure, other countries do have it, do use it, but not in the same way that the US consumer does. So I'd love to know, if you're using tretinoin, drop your country flag down there in the comments, because I imagine the vast majority it will be the US flag because of the heavy promotion that was done at this time, and that's just carried through in terms of its popularity to today. One of the other huge impacts which this had is in terms of off-label prescribing. So before tretinoin was really advertised to consumers who then pressured prescribers to give them access to the ingredient, off-label prescriptions were really, really rare. And that's because prescribers didn't want to absorb the risk onto themselves going off-label. It is now much more common to see off-label prescribing today than at any other point, and that is as a result of tretinoin. Before tretinoin really opened the floodgates and off-label prescribing almost became the norm, this wasn't something you actually saw, and this has had some really profound and, unfortunately in a lot of cases, very negative consequences. You can actually look, if you look at countrywide data, the US has significantly more as a percentage higher rate of off-label prescribing than any other country in the world that actually measures this. And that again is as a result of tretinoin opening the floodgates to saying, you know what, off-label prescriptions, nothing to worry about. Consumers want this, give it to them. And then, of course, that then opens up. And if you look at the current opioid epidemic in the US, pain clinics and other institutions that prescribe opioid-based painkillers, a lot of that is done skirting around what would be normal labeling and off-label usage. And it's this sort of direct-to-consumer advertising, which the Sackler family did in terms of Purdue Pharma in the case of the opioid thing. The amount of pressure that was put on probably wouldn't have happened, or to the same extent, if this hadn't occurred with tretinoin at the start, with them opening the floodgates to pressuring consumers to then pressure their prescriber to give them the products that they feel they need based on advertising. And then the prescriber feeling able to do this because being off-label was far less taboo than it used to be as a result of tretinoin really just opening, like I say, opening the floodgates to off-label prescribing, particularly in the US. And like I say, if you look at the rates of US off-label prescribing versus the rest of the world, there is a huge differential, and most of it can actually be traced back to tretinoin, which I think is another interesting data point, which shows just how much change one ingredient, one product can have on an entire industry. And yeah, this is one of the things that really fascinated me when I was looking into tretinoin, is just how impactful it's been as an ingredient on the whole pharmaceutical industry, particularly in the US. Some positive, fortunately a lot of negative consequences that come with it. So we had the images of the rhino mice. Everybody was like, yeah, I bought into that, and sales just continued to grow. And that's where the FDA started to think, yeah, maybe we might need to step in. So the FDA did decide to launch an investigation to see if they could do anything to control the level of off-label prescribing that was going on. And they concluded that actually nothing illegal was happening. There was no laws against direct-to-consumer marketing of pharmaceutical products. There was nothing wrong with off-label prescribing, provided that the prescriber is willing to take on the risk associated with it. And so they decided not to just get some control over the spiraling sales and off-label prescribing of retin-a, that they would expedite and speed up the approval of an anti-aging version of tretinoin. And they approved Renova, which is, some people might have heard of. It never really sold as well as retin-a for a number of reasons. First of all, it was approved in a lower concentration, 0.02%, which is a lot lower than what anybody would use today. It also had the directions of using it twice a day, morning and evening, which is very different to the application protocols that people have with tretinoin today. That surprised a lot of people, and they just thought, twice application. It just never grew in popularity as an ingredient, as a product, the way that retin-a did, even though they had the same ingredient, just in different strengths. Retin-a continued to go from strength to strength to strength. We still saw the same levels of off-label prescribing, and it didn't really achieve anything at all. However, one thing they did do in terms of this investigation is they did found a lot of evidence around destroyed documents and evidence. So they launched this investigation into the way that retin-a was being marketed, and obviously the subsidiary that was owned by Johnson & Johnson knew that something dodgy was going on, because they destroyed literally millions of documents as part of this process. The FDA found that as part of their investigations and actually fined them for the destruction of evidence rather than anything that they actually did inappropriately in terms of legal reasons. And they fined them $7.5 million, which was the equivalent of about 2 days worth of sales of retin-a at that point. So literally a drop in the ocean. They then approved the Renova, which was the anti-aging version, and kind of moved on. There was nothing much more that the FDA could actually do, because no crimes were being committed, even though, as controversial as it seemed looking back at the time, there was a limit to what they could actually do. And that really was the controversial start and approach of tretinoin. Now, since then, it's fallen off its patent. Patents last between 15 and 20 years. So whilst it was renewed for Renova, it actually then expired in the 90s, and people have had access to generic tretinoin ever since. It remains one of the most popular anti-aging skincare ingredients, and is often termed, you hear a lot of people saying, the most studied of the anti-aging ingredients, which actually isn't true. So anytime someone says that tretinoin is the most studied of the anti-aging ingredients, not actually true. A lot of studies went into it in terms of its impact on fighting acne and inflammation, but actually relatively few in terms of its anti-aging potential. Lots have been done since, so the number of studies is increasing and increasing and increasing. But that is a little bit of a myth in the skincare industry that it is the most studied. It's actually not. It's a bit of an up for discussion as to what title that is. Vitamin C, sunscreens, certainly if you class that as anti-aging in terms of its ingredients, and B vitamins, so things like niacinamide, have multitude of more studies against them versus tretinoin. But it's tretinoin that really captured the imagination because of the amount of marketing and direct consumer sales. And that really takes us to today. I think it's really hard to understate how impactful tretinoin has been as an ingredient on the whole pharmaceutical industry. The approaches that Johnson & Johnson and their subsidiary took in terms of promoting it direct to the consumer, that had been unheard of before then and has led to a lot of companies following suit, which is why you see so much prescription advertising in the US in a way that you just don't see in the rest of the world. It had a profound impact on off-label prescribing, which has unfortunately led to a lot of shady business goings on, which has actually led to a lot of harm after the event, and which may or may not have happened if the floodgates hadn't been opened by the off-label prescribing sensation that became retin-a. I think some things are regrettable, but is that the fault of tretinoin as an ingredient? No. It's the way that the pharmaceutical and big pharma industry was working at the time, and I know a lot of people would argue if Johnson & Johnson and their subsidiaries didn't do that in the 70s, somebody would have done it shortly after and we'd be in the same situation, which absolutely I think probably would have been the case. But tretinoin really kick-started all of this. Does tretinoin work? It absolutely does. Whilst there were very limited studies at the time when the brand was making all these bold claims, since there have been a lot more studies, data points which show just how effective tretinoin is in terms of anti-aging, smoothing out fine lines and wrinkles and resurfacing the skin. Definitely a gold standard when it comes to anti-aging, but one that comes with quite a controversial past. So if you watched it this far, what do you guys think? Is it controversial? Do you just think that if Tretinoin and the owners of Tretinoin hadn't done it, some other big pharma brand would have? Do you think anything would have materially changed? I genuinely believe that tretinoin as an ingredient has had such a profound impact on the wider pharmaceutical industry in a way that it's really difficult to comprehend. Obviously, we don't know where we'd be today if it had never existed, because other brands might have stepped in and filled that void, but genuinely, they reshaped the way that, in the US in particular, pharmaceuticals were marketed, prescribed, and how the relationship between prescriber, patient, and regulator just completely changed overnight. And it was all thanks to a decision made in the 70s around the promotion of tretinoin. So there you have it, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and wherever you are in the world, guys. Stay safe, stay well, and love your skin. Take care. Bye.